Sports is full of amazing second half comebacks. It's stuff like the Patriots coming back 25 points in Super Bowl 51 to beat the Falcons, or the Red Sox overcoming a 3-0 deficit in the ALCS to eventually go on to win their first World Series since 1918, or non-Boston examples, probably. But we don't really talk about filmmakers in the same way, first and second acts and comebacks, and I think that's a mistake. I think some have very interesting filmographies that can be broken up into these parts. Because one director, I think, has been counted out by culture as fallen from grace after his first act, when I'd argue he's been putting out some of his best work since then. I am talking about Tim Burton. We all know where Burton starts. Batman, Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands, and more are some of the biggest hits of the 80s and 90s. Tim Burton at the time was on top of the world, all the way up until 2001 that is, when he released Planet of the Apes. The movie was reviled by critics and audiences alike, and for I'd say, good reason. And I think this caused moviegoers to doubt Burton from here on out. It's the end of his first half. While Burton doesn't have the sort of miracle comeback that I described earlier, he does rebound from Planet of the Apes in fascinating and unique ways. While his second half does have some genuine misses, from Alice in Wonderland to Dark Shadows, it also has 4 of his most unique, most interesting films. And I want to celebrate his second half. So come along with me as I discuss his 4 films that I think showcase his true strengths and maybe even show off different sides of him that were not on display in that first half. I'm talking about Big Fish, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, and Big Eyes. Full spoilers for all 4 ahead.
Telling the story of my father's life, it's impossible to separate fact from fiction, the man from the myth. The best I can do is to tell it the way he told me. It doesn't always make sense, and most of it never happened.
Big Fish was released in 2003, and was, I feel, Burton's first attempt to really swerve after the failure of Planet of the Apes. He wanted to make something different, mature even, and I think he succeeded. Big Fish follows Will Bloom, a writer who tries to reconnect with his father Edward before Edward's oncoming death. Edward has always told tall tales about his past life, and it frustrated Will to the point of their falling out. So, before his father dies, Will decides to listen to his father's stories one last time. His father tells of a fantastical life, starting from a childhood as a big fish in a small pond, to leaving and exploring the world. He visits a magical town called Spectre that seems frozen in time, meets a giant, a werewolf, works at a circus, marries Will's mother, fights in Korea, assists a bank robber, and all in all, lives a full life. The film ends with Will telling his own fantastical story to his father on his deathbed, where Will takes him back to the river where he caught the titular big fish, and all of his friends and loved ones are waiting for him. At Edward's funeral, Will learns that, even if all his father did was tell tall tales, there was truth in all of them, that his father really did live a full, wonderful life. Will decides to keep the tradition going. Like I said, this was Burton's attempt to be mature. Watching through his movies, you can clearly see him relating to his protagonists. Edward Scissorhands, Bruce Wayne, and Ed Wood all have shades of Tim Burton. All weirdos, all outcasts, but passionate about what they love, and find it hard to relate to the things that they don't. But here, that doesn't quite happen. You see, just before production on the movie started, Burton lost his own father, and was about to have his first kid. It's impossible not to think that this influenced the movie a little bit. Will, the son, is more in the forefront in the original novel. He's the one that actually narrates the stories, not Edward. In the movie, Edward narrates the stories himself. While Will is much more of the Burton protagonist, Edward feels like who Burton is relating to more, and I think that's what his take on the movie comes from. The thing is, I really believe that if Burton had adapted it earlier in his career, that's how it would have been too. He entered a new phase of his life, and so did Big Fish. It became about a man reflecting on his life, rather than a boy reflecting on his father's. And it's truly better for it. The ending 10 minutes or so of Big Fish are likely the most wonderful and beautiful of Burton's career. I rewatched it out of context just to write this video, and I cried. It's the best scene in any Tim Burton movie, and it makes the movie worth watching just for that alone. The movie didn't do great in theaters, it did fine. And I think that sort of feedback is what made Burton step back and avoid taking a risk like this for a very long time. His magical realism in this film is very different than his usual twisted vibe. It's just a very good movie, and thankfully his next movie, while not as bold and daring as this one, is just as good.
Willy Wonka, the amazing chocolatier. Willy Wonka, everybody give a cheer.
Now on to a film that is in my top 5 for Burton, and is my favorite of the 4 we're going to talk about today, which is a genuine surprise to me. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory came out in 2005 and was a long gestating project. The Dahl estate had never been happy with the 1971 adaptation starring Gene Wilder. It is less than faithful adaptation of the source material, adding in saccharine songs, a lengthy scene that undercuts the original novel, and some other unnecessary subplots. Dahl didn't have control over the adaptation and hated it, so they were looking to make a more faithful adaptation. Before it was officially greenlit, the Dahl estate wanted to sign off on both director and actor. Martin Scorsese actually at one point was hired to direct. Bill Murray, Jim Carrey, Brad Pitt, Robin Williams, a lot of different names were considered for the actor. Now, Burton was hired first, and at that point, it became pretty obvious that only one person was gonna play Willy Wonka, Johnny Depp. Though actually Burton's number 2 pick was The Rock for some reason, which would have been wild, and worse. It would have been way, way worse. We all know this story. 5 kids win the chance to see the inside of Willy Wonka's factory. They are the overweight eater Augustus Gloop, the spoiled Veruca Salt, the competitive Violet Beauregard, the manic and lazy Mike TV, and finally our humble Charlie Bucket. Over the course of the visit, the children fall victim to various temptations and have to abandon the tour, leaving only Charlie. While the general structure of this 2005 version is the same as the novel and the 1971 version, it keeps the trademark nasty apathy of the novel that the 71 version cut out. Let's look at Wonka's introduction in both. In 71, he's introduced like a magician, enchanting the public with a magic trick. He's unknowable, mysterious, and always surprising. And Depp's is just weird. He built a display and musical number that could only be the work of someone in isolation for over 20 years, and then proceeds to act like the children are freaks. It's a mix between Ed Wood and Burton's Bruce Wayne, and it works perfectly. It's my favorite Depp performance in any of the Burton films. So, why am I spending so much time talking about the 1971 version? It's because it's at the core of what I want to talk about with this: Burton's skill in adaptations. Nearly all of Tim Burton's films are adaptations. The only exceptions are Edward Scissorhands, Ed Wood, Corpse Bride, and Frankenweenie. And even then you can kind of argue about Ed Wood and Corpse Bride. He continued to make more famous adaptations after this, like Alice in Wonderland or Dumbo, but none of them get quite at the heart of it like Charlie. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was meant to be a more straightforward adaptation, but it's kinda not. John August, the co-writer, and Burton add a lot to this script. Most prominent is Willy Wonka's backstory with his father, Christopher Lee. Much like the Bloom family in Big Fish, Willy and his father have not spoken in years, mostly because they fundamentally view life differently, though in this case it's Willy's love of chocolate against his father's dentistry business. While I think Burton has a lot of sympathy for Charlie, it keeps the focus on Willy in a way that the novel doesn't. As I mentioned before, both the novel and film have this sort of nasty apathy towards the children and their parents. This actually appears in a lot of Burton's films and is one of his strongest undercurrents. While many filmmakers show a contempt for the rich and powerful, Burton's is unique and quite simple. Take for example John Carpenter, who keeps his aim squarely on Reagan-era politics, fear of the other, and the elevation of the rich. Burton, on the other hand, just thinks rich people are lame and boring, and never turns down the chance to point that out. It's honestly why I think he's such a great fit for the material. He doesn't blink once at treating the children or their parents with absolute contempt. I'll talk about a similar thing when we attend the tale of Sweeney Todd in just a moment. Charlie and Chocolate Factory is a perfect fit for him because he clearly is interested in this world. Take his later adaptations, like Miss Peregrine or Alice in Wonderland, it just doesn't seem like he has anything to say about them. Except for like that first 10 minutes of Alice, that is again just talking about how boring and stuffy rich people are. Not all of his adaptations are like this. They don't all have this sort of pointed voice, but they could be. if he just chose the projects more carefully and chose adaptations that he truly cared about. Sweeney Todd is a weird movie. It's a weird musical. It's a weird play. It's a weird Penny Dreadful. It's a very different choice for Burton, but I think that's what makes it interesting. And it just shows another route that he could go down. Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, is, well, the tale of Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. After years of rotting in jail for a crime he didn't commit, he returns to London to try to pull his life together. You see, the reason he went to jail was that Judge Turpin was in love with Sweeney's wife and wanted him out of the picture. When Sweeney returns, he discovers that his wife has killed herself, and his daughter Joanna has been taken in by the judge. Sweeney returns to his old barbershop and meets Mrs. Lovett, who's opened a bakery underneath the shop. She laments that she has the worst pies in London and starts to get along with Sweeney. When Sweeney's old partner returns, Sweeney kills him after being blackmailed and hides the body just before the judge visits for a shave, not recognizing Sweeney. Sweeney realizes he could kill the judge, but gets interrupted by Joanna's suitor, saying he's eloping with her, upsetting the judge, who storms out. Sweeney, now disillusioned, realizes that all of London is beyond saving, and colludes with Lovett to kill every person that enters his barber shop, and use them for meat for her pies. Sweeney and Lovett do this for a while, and the whole time, a beggar woman has been observing this all happen. After Sweeney kills the judge's accomplice for getting too close, he's confronted by this beggar woman, but Sweeney doesn't understand her and kills her before the judge barges in on Sweeney. Once there, he kills the judge as well. When he goes downstairs to check on Lovett, he sees the face of the beggar woman. It's his wife from years ago. Sweeney is distraught and discovers that Lovett knew she was alive the whole time and only lied to Sweeney to be closer to him. Sweeney kills Lovett. Sweeney is then killed by the child who followed Sweeney's first victim. End of play. So yeah, it's dark and weird, and I struggle to explain why I like it as much as I did, but I did. I've never seen the original play, so I can't use that as a comparison point. And maybe it's just easy to carry a good play across the finish line, but Burton did it admirably. Like I mentioned before, this story has this hatred of the rich, and this can be found in the original play as well. Sondheim's original show tied Sweeney into the events of 1800s London, the Industrial Revolution, and its ability to just use people, then dispose of them when it's done. Sweeney is doing the same, just killing off the working class of London, while the rich stay unaffected by what's happening. While not the point of Burton's story, it's absolutely there, and it's absolutely turned towards the judge and his treatment of others as well. Burton has this reputation of being twisted, of these dark visions that scare people, and that's not really true, but most people still think it is. Sweeney is one of 3 R-rated Burton films, his other 2 being Ed Wood and Sleepy Hollow, and I can't help but imagine what his career would look like if he steered it into this more. Sleepy Hollow and Sweeney Todd are similar films, dealing with copious amounts of neck-slashing murders in a period piece. Burton has never done a straightforward horror movie, but Sleepy Hollow and Sweeney Todd both have elements of it, and I'd argue that both are successful. The murders are lurid and stylish. He honestly has an eye for this sort of thing. Let me pitch you another lane for Burton. Slash his budget, give him some sort of Blumhouse level horror movie. Make it R-rated, give it this cool monster or beast. I think his innate style will still come through regardless of how much it is, and that smaller budget will challenge him and make him try and be more creative while doing this really cool and unique idea. Or just let him direct another musical, you cowards! And now, after talking about how much I love his stylization, I'm going to talk about the exact opposite for his last movie. Big Eyes is a 2015 film, telling the true story of Margaret Keane and her husband Walter. Keane, newly divorced with a young child in the 50s, quickly tries to find a way to support her daughter. He quickly meets Walter, a charming dynamic painter, and the pair quickly hit it off. Margaret has a distinct style of painting, with gigantic soulful eyes, usually of her daughter. Walter is able to get their art exhibited after they marry, but only Margaret's art gets any attention. Jealous, Walter claims that it's his art, and talks Margaret out of protesting. Walter is boisterous and sociable, and Margaret, on the other hand, is quiet and awkward. Walter tells her it's better if he's the face of the operation. After years of marriage, slowly the lie eats away at Margaret. She cuts off from her friends and independence, painting away at Walter's behest. Margaret eventually discovers Walter's lie. He never knew how to paint. All the paintings he passed off as his own were ones he bought overseas. After almost burning down their house to threaten Margaret, she runs away and sues Walter for the rights to her paintings. The judge gives them a challenge. Both paint the Big Eyes paintings in an hour. Margaret is able to. Walter claims he has arm pain and can't paint. Margaret wins and is able to make money on future painting sales. Walter lives the rest of his life claiming to be the true painter. As you may have noticed, I didn't mention any men with scissor hands or talking skeletons or Beetlejuices. That's because this, along with Ed Wood, are Burton's only 2 movies that take place in the real world. They're both biopics. I mean, the next most realistic one is Sweeney Todd, the one with the murdering and all that. Yeah, these are his only ones without supernatural elements. And I think this actually works to the film's advantage. Taking away everything that we associate with Burton, stripping off all of those sorts of elements, we get to what he's actually really good at, which is surprisingly the characters. Walter and Margaret Keene feel like Burton characters, even in this domestic setting. Walter, like Ed Bloom before him, is this excitable, charismatic storyteller. Just Letty uses it for evil. Margaret, similar to Edward Scissorhands or Lydia Dietz before her, was a kind weirdo that struggled to feel like herself. Margaret isn't a goth like Edward or Lydia, but she's equally an outsider. Tim Burton likely can't relate to that sort of outsider that he used to at the beginning of his career, and Margaret is almost an evolution of that sort of character. Margaret is how it feels to be one of these Burton outsiders as an adult, when you're supposed to have everything figured out, but you don't. Now that I myself am much older than like Lydia or Edward, I find myself relating to Margaret way more.
And the strange thing is there's not a sad face to be found. Everyone is just so glad to see you. And send you off right.
So, what does the future hold for Tim Burton? At the moment, he's developing a Netflix series called Wednesday, about Wednesday Addams of the Addams family going to a supernatural boarding school. I'm cautiously optimistic about this. Hopefully the act of developing a television show instead of a movie, the first time he's ever done this, will sort of energize him and challenge him to do something new and different. Time will tell, but it's an interesting choice for him. I think Burton is an easy guy to dismiss. He's weird, his movies are weird, I don't like it. But if you really feel that way, I implore you to check out the 4 movies that I've talked about today. Each is brimming with wit, design, and his own unique voice. Both unique from each other and uniquely Burton. His run in the 80s and 90s is incredible, up there with any classic run of directors. And it's hard when a director can't keep up with this high level of quality. But I think Tim Burton is someone who can still surprise us. I think a lot of directors can have their second acts dismissed. Any director that works long enough can fade to the background, or have audiences not notice these later efforts. For instance, take Steven Spielberg. Bridge of Spies is one of his best movies, but is rarely brought up as one in conversation. Unless you're talking to me, in which I've probably mentioned it like 3 times in a single conversation. Or think of how the internet dismissed The Irishman as just another Scorsese mobster movie. Oh, though I should note that Hugo and Shutter Island also rule. I think that sort of thing happened to Burton too. People go into, say, Charlie or Sweeney and think, oh, it's just Tim Burton working with Johnny Depp again. I've seen it. I'll pass. But then when he tries to mix it up, like with Big Eyes or Big Fish, people just dismiss it as him being out of his lane or doing something that he shouldn't. I think it's easy to do this with Burton, and if you feel this way, I implore you to give this back half a shot. Just like any other director with this long sort of filmography. You might like what you find. Okay, I said it once at the beginning of the script, and then I said it again during the Big Eyes section. Great! Only 2 times in the video did I say Beetlejuice. Oh wait, crap!